InsurgenSeas podcast. This is another episode. I'm very happy and honored today to be joined by three wonderful people from far away. Unfortunately, one, Stefanos Levidis, joining us from Athens, and Daniel Powers, Lizzie Malcolm, joining us from Glasgow, Scotland. Welcome, Stefanos, Lizzie, and Daniel, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Nicola, for the invitation. The honor is ours.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's great to have you on the podcast. We have so many great things to talk about, hopefully today. Mainly, I want to present you and your work. Stefanos Levidis is a researcher and visual practitioner specializing in architectural investigation and human rights documentation. He's a research fellow at Forensic Architecture in Goldsmiths in University of London, and director of Forensic Architecture Initiative Athens, which is in dialogue and part of the broader family on forensic architecture. Levidis holds a PhD from the Center for Research Architecture at Goldsmiths, University of London, and has lectured internationally on topics intersecting architecture, technology, and justice. Lizzie and Daniel Powers, Lizzie Malcolm and Daniel Powers, are designers and coders based in Glasgow, Scotland, presenting and collecting research on socially engaged projects, including work documenting the Gaza flotilla. As co-founders of Rectangle, they create digital tools and archives that explore political and humanitarian issues through design and technology. So welcome again. It's a pleasure to have you on board. And I would like already to start with a question about the Flotilla Tracker. And this is your latest work. I think it's a cooperative work, if I'm not wrong. Work together on it. We want to know more about it. What's the purpose for making it, for visualizing practically the ships that go to Gaza. Who's using it and who is it for? Can you tell us a bit more about it? Perhaps Stefanos first, and then Lizzie and Daniel.
Yeah, sure. I think Lizzie and Daniel are definitely better equipped to answer this question. I have not been hands-on on this project. What we do know is that this massive wave of maritime solidarity towards Gaza needs to be seen by the world. It's their main means of protection. We've seen attacks in the past, including in the last two missions that we mapped at Forensic Architecture, and the flotilla approached us to make sure that their journey, their trajectory is monitored, is broadcast out to the world, and our tools are at their disposal. I'm sure Daniel and Lizzie are better equipped to answer and have a lot more to say on this than myself.
Sure. Thanks, Stefanos. We initially, I think the Freedom Flotilla Coalition was in touch with Forensic Architecture around the start, or like just before the sailing of the Conscience. Essentially to create, as Stefanos says, a tracker to let the wider, let the public sort of watch this voyage. And I think at the time we were both like, yes, this is our wheelhouse. We know how to sort of create something like this. So kind of started, well, I think just to say that like, it has become much more complex than we initially thought. I think for the Conscience, we did just start by kind of a very simple map with a single vessel and like an API connection to using their MMSI number, which worked pretty well, except of course the Conscience didn't get very far after it was attacked by a drone just off Malta. So yeah, maybe I'll just first talk a little bit about how the trackers kind of developed from that point. And like with the Madeleine, which was the next vessel, we kind of realized that the transceiver, and we're not experts on this at all, but we kind of quickly realized that the transceiver only worked very close to shore.
So I guess there's two, like this with the MSI numbers, we could use AIS tracking, this automatic
identification system.
Yeah, the automatic identification system, exactly. And I guess many vessels will have a satellite-based AIS tracking, but others use this terrestrial system where it's the sort of vessel to land or vessel to vessel radio communication. So with Madeleine, as soon as it got sort of out of range of that system, we lost the ability to track it with AIS, and so then started looking at using these Garmin devices to track the rest of the journey.
And that works with some, there's like two different ways in which those Garmin inReach devices share their location, and we had to kind of make sure they were set up in the correct way. But basically, that worked really well for the Madeleine and for the Handler. So one of the things that we noticed at this point is like the way that the Garmins are set up is that because up until this point we were kind of just presenting the information directly from Garmin or from the Data Elastic API, but at that point we realized that we could only get like a single coordinate from the Garmin, so we had to start a kind of process of saving the information as it came in, which I think in the end, as we've sort of realized, is a really important part of this whole process, because now that there are, I think currently 22 boats, we're just about to add another 17 or something. It's like most of these boats their journeys are not being recorded in any other service. So it's like we've kind of spent a long time building a content management system to to make sure that the information of these journeys is collected and stored for future research, or because we can pretty much assume that they're going to meet resistance at some point.
That was like when we initially set this up, we kind of had in mind that the idea was that that people could sort of log onto the website and see, like, sort of track the progress and see what as they were getting closer and stuff. But then as the vessels were attacked or boarded, then we started getting questions of like what were the coordinates at which these attacks took place, or what was a timestamp and latitude and longitude coordinates. And so then we started investing more time in just making sure we had like a good record of from each device the data that was being presented on the map,
and that it was stable.
So you're doing this kind of mapping also because we don't have any other way to see to follow practically the route of these ships. I mean, we don't have information from vessel tracker, the official.
Some of them are on vessel tracker. Some of them do have these AIS transceivers on board, but especially for the GSF, I think it involves a lot of smaller boats, which don't. So some of them don't have that.
Yeah.
So they installed a tracker in order for you to be able to get the signal.
Yeah. For the GSF, I think there was a lot of coordination beforehand to make sure that each boat had a specific device, which we knew had worked in the past. And there have been different people kind of making sure that those are set up in the correct way and communicating the map share feed details to us in various signal chats, and we are sort of collecting all of that in a database of the current vessels.
I think
you could see online how many people are watching, are following in real time.
We
don't present that necessarily on the map. One thing that happened with I think it was the Handala the public interest became so big that the site got a ton of traffic, really like the most visited project we've ever been a part of. So that came with a few quite big issues. One being that we were using like proprietary base maps for just the geographical information, and that racked up like really substantial bills in the end. So one of the changes we had to do for this tracker is to like self-host the map tiles and make sure we were using like fully open source tools. So that was one thing.
That was also an issue with the AIS tracking, because like for that we also have a subscription to one of these AIS databases with a limited number of requests. So like the initial version really wouldn't work for the current implementation, where like every visitor was sort of making a request to the AIS database. So now we're sort of collecting all that information in one place and making sure that there's not, there's like at one point where all the information about the position of all the boats is collected, and then that sort of one feed is presented to all the visitors.
Something that we really didn't take into account, though, which is happening with this current voyage, is that we had thought of this as a tool for the public to watch, so people from afar. But actually, we've been getting lots of requests in the Signal chat for features for the people on the crews on the boats themselves to use. So, like, please add a scale. Please make sure that like the current position is like in the table, because they're really,
and like the headings and courses so that they can kind of see where they all are in relation to each other as they progress.
Yeah.
So it's become a tool for the flotilla itself, you see.
Yeah. So
wow.
And we try.
That's interesting.
Yeah, we're basically getting we have to be quite responsive in sort of different features that come up, because now that there's been these two drone attacks, we now need to, make sure that we preserve the positions and the evidence, or at least some of the evidence, of these attacks. And we imagine there will be more or different. They're going to meet different, resistance as they travel. So we're trying to basically do that today.
Maybe to take a step back and provide some context on why the flotilla came to us with this request is, at the beginning, the request, the goal of this collaboration was twofold, right? Yes, there was an element to do with tracking, which was very important from the outset, but there was also a request to be on standby in case the flotilla endures an attack, and be available to preserve evidence and analyze this evidence, to substantiate that there has been an attack, to help the flotilla verify the attackers, and so on and so forth. And maybe also wanted to bring another dimension in the reason we know, the reason why...
a form of self-defense. I'm just
of course,
making sure that we understand.
Totally. There's this kind of an element of self-defense to the tracker itself, to the flotilla being visible, but also to preserving evidence of potential violations, which the flotilla knew to expect, right? And indeed, they were proven right. But the reason we know what AIS data is, and the reason we have this kind of toolkit to map journeys and violations at sea, is because we at Forensic Architecture have been looking into migrant mobility across the Mediterranean and other seas for almost a decade now, or for over a decade now. And we have been assisting civilian rescue missions. So that's why we're familiar with this kind of territory, the territory of the Mediterranean. And it's a question of applying tools that we have developed across the years for this kind of work into a somewhat different context. I don't want to say an altogether different context. As we saw, the Madeleine came upon a vessel carrying migrants south of Crete, for example. So you see how these paths cross, and how this Mediterranean basin is crossed by different kinds of vessels, and it's a question of applying similar tools to a different purpose.
I wanted to ask you about that, and thanks for bringing it up. First of all, I want to ask you about the tools. How can you explain a bit more? Would you like to explain a bit more about the kind of tools that you develop? What kind of work did Forensic Architecture did the last 10 years, since 2015, if I'm not wrong, that you are working on refugee mobility in the Mediterranean? Can you tell us a bit more about these tools and how they became the foundation for the tracker? And generally, the idea of of turning the sea into a space of monitoring for social justice?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a question to both of us, but I might start with a kind of the earlier history. There's this famous saying by Carl Schmitt that the sea resists haraxis, the sea resists being engraved and kind of partitioned and resists sovereignty, et cetera, et cetera. We nowadays see this kind of not applying any longer, I would argue, to a degree. States exert sovereignty and territorial rights over the sea by multiple zone nations, contiguous zones, territorial waters, etc. These are all things that can be mapped and are relevant in cases of human rights violations, such as the ones that we're investigating. And with the help of colleagues who have started a separate endeavor called forensic oceanography, which has now evolved into something else, we have started to look into how the surface and the body of the sea can be kind of decoded for all its visual regimes that monitor it. Think of satellites, the weather data, etc., to provide to serve as a basis for a cartography in case that's needed. So we've been working with groups of asylum seekers, with communities that try to cross the Mediterranean into Europe for a good 10, 12 years now, to support their claims before usually European fora, after they have endured violence at sea, to provide a cartography of how events unfold. They would board a dinghy or a vessel, suffer egregious violations at the hands of coast guards, and they would turn to us to kind of provide a counter cartography of the event, because, of course, the sea being such a space that's away from civilian view, the dominant narrative is always the narrative of the state, the narrative of the Coast Guard, the narrative of the Navy, that is more often than not the only actor in place, except for migrant vessels. So we would work with groups of asylum seekers to see how we can bring technology into enforcing their argumentation before a court or before the media.
So forensic is intimately connected to legal documentation, right? Or documentation for legal purposes, practically.
I mean, it's a practice that is addressed to several fora, hence the forensic. It's a practice of making evidence public, be it in a court of law or in a space of culture or in the media, in public debate, and so on and so forth. At the core of our practice is our director, Eyal Weissman, likes to describe how the idea for our agency, which has now become kind of a sub-discipline of architecture, comes from a text written by Edward Said some 25 years ago, where he called for a counter-cartography of Palestine. And I think that's relevant to our discussion today, where if cartography is the tool of the oppressor, of the colonizer, those who are oppressed by the colonizer need to develop alternative cartographic tools, right, to represent their territory, to know and to render visible, their land in the case of Palestine. So to a degree, forensic architecture was born out of this proposition. And we try to take this legacy further. I mean, nowadays, with kind of the insertion of technological systems and systems of surveillance, there's things to be done beyond the 2D surface of the map, right? There's videos, there's sounds, there's the elements to be taken into account. And we try to create a spatial condition, a virtual spatial condition where these can be examined side by side, space and time vis-a-vis an event can be examined side by side, and we can start to produce counter-narratives against the narrative of the state. That's what we call counter-forensics. So this was a very long detour to say that we have been developing a toolkit for over 10 years now to look at violations at sea. The flotilla knew to expect violations at sea, so they came to us through common activist channels to see whether we would be happy to assist them in their endeavor, in making their journey visible when that is desired, because a large degree of cartography also has to do with, visibility versus obscurity and opacity. Who can represent? When are the conditions right to be represented and visible? And this is something that Lizzie and Dan have also, I know, been dealing with in their communication with the flotilla. When to make the position of the vessel visible? When is it safe? When does it work in favor of the flotilla? And when would it pose a potential danger? I think they can discuss that better than.
Yeah. I have this question very high up on my list, so it's good to start that discussing this. Yeah, we cannot hear you, Stefanos.
Oh no, I wasn't speaking. I was waiting for Lizzie and Dan to speak. But I guess this also applies to migrant crossings, which is kind of my field of expertise. There are times when it's desirable to be seen. And there are times when to be seen means to be attackable, deportable, arrestable, and so on and so forth. So we've seen that with the flotilla also, that while we might have the details for a vessel, it's not the right time to add it to the map just yet. Indeed, we know that the military apparatus of Israel is also producing their own maps, and they're not necessarily relying on our tracker to know where a vessel is before they attack it. But you don't want to give tools to the other side when they might not have them. So it's always a balance.
Yeah.
So how did you deal with this balance, the sensitive balance, Lizzie and Daniel? I guess you have also insights on that.
I think in regards to that, it's not so complicated. It's really just we get a signal from them, really from somebody in the organization of when to make things public. So we take their lead on that.
Yeah, I think especially because I know there's going to be more vessels joining the flotilla from various places over the next days and weeks, and I think. At the moment, it's there's just mainly a concern not to publicize the location of these vessels too early, or especially before they leave port. I think where they could already, potentially be detained or prevented from leaving before they're ready.
So you get actually heads up from the people on board whether now it's time to go visible or not.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's very much
in coordination.
Yeah, the coordination is, we're all in different chats with each other that are going all the time just to coordinate this. Yeah, and then maybe people on board and maybe people on shore that are kind of coordinating the voyages.
Yeah. That's fascinating, especially because the whole idea is to bring testimonies, bring any form of legal evidence to be used at courts, and perhaps also the current flotilla will become a court case on the International Court of Justice or International Criminal Court, or even at another UN court or a national court, it might actually happen. So in that sense, it's good to keep track of all attacks, so not only the rocks, but also the attacks, right? I guess it's mostly a tool for defense, as you call it, rather than a tool for people to follow their journey, but I guess it happens too.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you if you have concrete cases where data that you collected were used at court, and how did it go?
No, I was just going to say, I think Stefanos described the discipline really well, so I wouldn't add to that, but just to say that, we're often building tools for different organizations to collect information, and it may be at the point that you don't know why or how it's important yet. But it's just this, this information has power, right? And so the collecting it, is super important to preserve this as evidence. And I think that, later that can be transformed into a court, evidence for a court case, or you can use that as the basis to collect testimonies from people that were involved in what happened. So yeah, it can just be kind of like a sort of underpinning of that eventual testimony.
Yeah, I mean, insofar as violence is enacted through space, and we see that in Gaza more and more, right? Tools that allow us to kind of unpack this spatial condition of repression and violence can be very useful in international fora, international legal fora. And I know Lizzie and Dan have been working towards kind of a wider cartography of the genocide in Gaza that is part of the submission by South Africa against Israel. So there is a precedent where this kind of meticulous spatial research is brought before court of law. Now, there are other separate questions that merit a different discussion about the kind of the extent to which law can help prevent such genocidal forces. I think we have reasons to be skeptical about that. At present. But yeah, I mean,
to ask about the limits of the law, exactly,
yeah.
And if there are other functions, other purposes beyond the legal courts, in that sense. What would you think? What's your experience so far? Would say, would I also be allowing a strategic, a tactical rethinking of the routes? As you say, the space as a terrain for mobility, where the ways to document mobility might also be a helpful tool for those who might want to enhance the ways to be mobile, to be also, actually escaping the state gaze or even the visibility that is of a bad, it can also be harmful to them.
For sure. I mean, there's different temporalities of the work, and one is kind of after the fact and documenting and litigating, etc. But there's the preemptive dimension, which is a large part of the work that we do with the flotilla. I think it's our, if I may call it an investigation or a project, it's, as far as our projects go, it's the one that's enjoyed the widest kind of popular. I don't know what the right terminology is. It's kind of gone viral, right? This tracker. People share it on social media. We see it a lot. I see people on my circle in Greece kind of reposting the map of the flotilla that I never sent to them. It's kind of gone into the mainstream.
Yeah.
And this is a very useful tool when you have 40-something vessels sailing the Mediterranean towards Gaza, and you have, 1 million people sharing their location at the same time. You have this famous saying, all eyes on the flotilla, all eyes on Gaza. I think these digital eyes can kind of offer or shield the flotilla. I hope I'm not naive in saying that, and I hope I won't be proven wrong. I very well might be, but the more people see this trajectory, this map, I think it becomes a very powerful political tool with an agency in the present, not just in the future, not just after a potential attack, so that we can know where each vessel was attacked and how, but also so that it's not attacked.
Yeah. And then the Handala even had a live stream, which was pretty confronting to watch. I think there's obviously no foreign media allowed in Gaza, and so many Palestinian journalists killed. I think to watch something something, them boarding the Handala in real time, and watch this force in real time was really really confronting.
Yeah, so this was actually what I was thinking, the second purpose or the main purpose even nowadays, especially when we see all these attacks on journalism in Gaza, and on the other hand, the complicit mainstream media reporting on Gaza. So what you guys are doing is also a form of journalism, practically, reporting through these engines, tracking what's happening on the ground, on the surface of the sea, and people can then disseminate it and become a tool for information, for knowledge, for journalism, practically. The journalism that doesn't really exist. I mean, you do the job, actually, that journalists supposed to be doing, but they're not doing.
Yeah, I mean...
Talk about mainstream journalism, yeah.
Yeah, like you say, I think we should use this and every platform to speak about how journalists are being exterminated in Gaza. And indeed, many of our close friends and collaborators, namely people from Ain Media, were amongst the people who were killed in the first days of the genocide. So, yeah, there's a void being actively created by the death forces, which
the side.
Yeah, which we are part of a wider consortium that tries to fill this gap, right? We are trying to work with people on the ground, also on their behalf to provide kind of clarity where there isn't, or to provide the counter narrative at the very least. So we have been investigating cases like the Al Ahli hospital blast. We talked with Hassan Abu Sita, the doctor who was there at the time of the blast.
I just saw him today at the elevator, by the way. He lives above me.
Okay. We'll send our regards.
Of course.
We have been speaking with survivors of the Nakba to model the destroyed village of Al Ma'in. So we're working across different temporalities to see both the present condition in Gaza and how this is enabled.
Oh, we lost you now. Are you there, Stefanos? The connection today is really bad throughout the AUB, and maybe, I guess, throughout Beirut and Lebanon. We lost Stefanos, I think. Stefanos, are you there? At least we have Lizzie and Daniel, right? That's good. We have 2 out of 3. So what is your sense of this tool becoming a tool for people's journalism, practically? And in that sense, is there any possibility of adding layers beyond the tracker?
Yeah.
So for example, people's opinions, expressions, life stories. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we've been collaborating with forensic architecture on other projects and tools that maybe address some of this. So, because one of the things, of course, of the lack of foreign journalists not being allowed in Gaza and limited images coming out of there is just for people to be able to understand the scale of destruction taking place. So one of the things we're trying to work on with them is a tool for the annotation of satellite images over time. So trying to getting large numbers of people to review and annotate the satellite images across different days to try to kind of map the scale of destruction, map sort of roads and berms and being built, map the location of tanks and tents and other sort of infrastructure being created there.
And that's kind of happening on a daily basis from researchers at Forensic Architecture and also student at a small group of student volunteers. And it's kind of that's happening all the time. And then from that, they're kind of extracting, more formed pieces of research and narratives about, as Dan said, the scale of the destruction or it was recently used a lot in their piece about aid. So I think there's a lot of potential in that those kinds of systems to open up to communities to kind of co-create knowledge of different forms, not just this purely sort of geospatial data, but also to collect testimonies at different locations. I think that would be a kind of end goal, is that we're able to extend that or use this tool in these different, and I think that speaks to what Stefanos was just talking about before he left the call, but about documenting the Nakba and sort of using satellite imagery, which there are from around the time to kind of create a picture.
I hear you. I want to ask another kind of question, if I may. I mean, that's pretty clear to me that forensic does this kind of work. The idea is to collect testimonies, as you say, after the fact, after the crime, right? Hence also the forensic. Can we even imagine collecting data in order to avoid the crime? How can this kind of information help movements or people on the run, or Palestinians in that case, fighting against a terrible occupation, genocidal army, to avoid being targeted, to avoid being killed, to avoid being exterminated? Is there any function there that can be actually used before the crime?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's I think, like, in one way, as Stefanos mentioned, there's this idea of like a collective eye, or sort of, that has some effect maybe of influencing power. I don't know how much. It doesn't seem like much in the case of Israel, but I think that in some circumstances can be really important to know that things are being watched and tracked and recorded, that it's not, especially if, like, mainstream journalism isn't doing a good job. It does have an effect. I mean, it's hard, because I think, like, it's always like the best you can do in terms of this is, like, sort of try to put as many systems in place as you can to try to collect information that you know is going to be relevant later, or that you think is going to be relevant later, so that because oftentimes, like, after something happens, it becomes too late, or you're left with, you have to use, like, there's information to collect, but if you can have systems in place collecting before something happens, then often that's like the best best you can do. Yeah, I mean, I suppose also, like, as these practices become more used, if this kind of work and evidence does have, like, legal repercussions, then you could say on, like, a longer time scale that you may be preventing, like, future human rights abuses by having some impact on law on court cases.
And of course, this whole idea is based on the hope that the international legal system still has some role, still functions. But what we're experiencing right now, the last 2 years, gives us a lot of doubt about that. We seem to have lost our friends. I don't see
it's possible as internet
anymore. And probably this has to do with the fact that he's based in Greece. Stefanos is missing in action. In any case, I think we also reached our time limit. I want to thank you so much for being with us today, for the discussion, giving us a sense of the tracker of the tools that are used today from social movement, human rights activists, and others, people on the move, people fighting state oppression or the state gaze, to be able to counter cartography, to use counter-cartographic practices. That was a discussion today with Lizzie Malcolm, Daniel Powers, and Stefanos Levidis, who we lost along the way. But hopefully we're going to have him on another show, another discussion soon. Thank you so much, Liz.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting
me.
us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a great day.
Bye.